All right, everybody. Feel free to filter into whatever seats. Don't worry about getting cozy with the people near you. We can fill out all of these. Welcome to the $60 problem. We are facing an inflection point in games where we have to make some decisions both as developers and as an audience. Many of you guys, how many of you guys have been following the Star Wars news of late? Right, everybody. Great, perfect. Put your hands down. For the one, oh no, one person just like, yep, my hand's still up. I'm still following. I'm looking at my phone right now, following it. So for the two people who didn't have your hands up, short version is there was a huge explosion about EA putting loot boxes in a game that you paid $60 for. There's more to it than that. I think they did it very poorly. I think there are lots of reasons why the way it was implemented there were bad. But it forces us to a conversation, which is $60 really a sustainable price point, especially for AAA games today? And we have to talk about a little bit about the history of AAA games. Does anybody remember the first time they spent $60 on a game, or started spending $60 regularly? Yes. Do you remember when?
Like right when the 360 and stuff came out.
Right, so at least a full generation ago. And from what I've looked into it, it was about 2004, actually, that we started regularly putting AAA games at $60. Since then, what's some issues that have come up? Anybody, just throw up a hand. Yeah, over there. Okay, so we've got a bunch of other things. Like we've tried to get people to spend more money on things like season passes, but why might keeping the price point that we had in 2004 be a problem in 2018? Yeah, over there.
Tech cost increases.
So right, definitely tech cost increases. Back there.
Inflation.
Right. So by inflation alone, we've had about 25% inflation since 2004, which means that by inflation alone, games should cost about $75. But we're terrified as an industry because we've done some metrics that say if we ever charge more than $60, fans will revolt, no one will ever buy a game again, and the industry will collapse. I don't believe this is true because we have the same metrics when we moved from $40 and when we moved from $50. Mm-hmm. But so what we've been trying to do, like with the season passes, like with DLC, and now with loot boxes, is find other ways to offset the cost of games. What is something that has helped keep price down since 2004? Anyone? Yeah.
More people are actually getting into the hobby, so there's more people buying games.
Perfect. Got it in one. Excellent.
Yeah.
So right, the consumer base is bigger, so it's not as bad as it may have first seemed when I say by inflation alone, we're talking $75. But on the other hand, games have gotten more expensive to make. We talked about tech costs, right? It's a lot harder to make a PS4 game than it was to make a PS2 game.
Hang on, James, can we put some numbers on that for a second?
I would say it's about 2 harder.
No.
All right, great.
1.8 hard.
In 2004, a AAA game was
You wanted actual
$2
dollars.
to $5 million budget, plus marketing about the same amount. But in 2004, roughly speaking, a AAA game was, you could make a AAA game for $2 to $5 million.
Doing some stuff with Activision at the time. Well, I was a little bit later, but we were talking $10 million for a AAA Activision game.
And
right?
now?
Right. Now you're easily talking $100 million.
Plus marketing.
Yeah.
And, I mean, that's not the high end, actually. If you talk about things like the Star Wars MMO, or if you're talking about things like Destiny, those games...
Crest 500 million easily.
Right. I have exact numbers that I can't talk about.
Yeah. I just wanted to give them, yeah.
$500 million, though,
easily.
is very accurate, and that's with some of the stuff being shifted around so it doesn't look like quite as big of a write-down.
Right.
$500 million.
Oh, no. It's much more than
Yeah.
And think about the number of board games you could make with $500 million.
Yeah. We gave up on $60 a long time ago.
But then there was, if your game fails and you've spent $500 million, now what do you do?
Yeah.
So I just want to bring this in terms of the context of why this is such a problem. Because, hey, $500 million, I mean, if you make Destiny, yay, you win.
Sort of.
Yes.
Yeah.
You get bought by Activision.
You win with an asterisk.
Right. Well, and this is a really interesting point, because what's the problem when a game fails, right? What's the problem for us still charging $60 for all the other games? Like if it's a game that somebody like Activision or EA makes, well, this new Star Wars Battlefront doesn't only have to cover the cost of Star Wars, but let's just talk the Star Wars franchise. How many of you guys remember EA just canceled an entire enormous AAA Star Wars game that they had clearly sunk at least like $50 million into? So now this new Star Wars game also has to make $50 million above whatever its development costs were for EA as a whole to break even on their Star Wars franchise, much less games in general. So we're having some issues with figuring out what the price point is. One of the options has obviously been to defer the cost, right? Which means that everybody can buy it at $60, and then we're going to get some people, we're going to try and get them to pay $1,000, and that means a bunch of people get to buy it for $60 instead of $75. But we've been having problems with that. So I wanted to open it up to you guys. Thoughts as far as the future, how to do this right, what's been good about some of our approaches, and what's been problematic about some of our approaches. And problematic doesn't only have to be problematic for the consumer, but also consumer behaviors that have got us to move in this direction, that of things like whale-focused loot boxes.
Well, I actually have an interesting question that maybe either of you guys will know better than I will. When you talk about $500 million or more dollars being sunk into Destiny, where do those costs go?
There's a fire just in the back of the room.
Yeah.
It's a big furnace.
They don't have
Do it
heat.
Every day you got to pay that person.
Right, and that
to earn
person's
the money.
making $1 million.
Shoveling the money into the fire.
They have a special suit they have to wear. So this is a great question. I can answer some of it, and then you want to answer some of it. So I will just give the standard number at this point for a AAA game when we're doing budgeting is $10,000 a head per person working on a game.
Oh, that's
Oh,
low.
I see someone nodding over there.
That's
who I might
low.
eventually-
$10,000
You are welcome
wait.
Up here if
No,
you
no.
dare
A
go
month,
No,
right?
No, but that's low.
$10,000 a month per
15.
person.
I've been doing. I mean,
Okay, great. So the last
That's a monthly cost, though, right?
yeah.
Okay, yeah. 'Cause you can-
But that's a little low.
yeah, I agree.
150K a year is yeah.
So perfect. I should all introduce
Oh,
ourselves.
that's a good idea.
Sorry, these are all my friends, and so I know them. But I don't want to derail that discussion. So I was saying $10,000 a month. You were saying 15. It is definitely, especially in some place like San Francisco, it's certainly 15 at this point. I was doing Seattle studios.
Yeah.
But right, even that alone, and it's not unreasonable for a AAA game to have 200 people working on it at this point.
Well, the Destiny team was like way more than that.
So Assassin's Creed, not the most recent one, but the one before that, Black Flag, I heard they had 900 people over the course of all the studios they had work on it, right?
Yeah, SWTOR had I think 700 people. Blizzard, last I heard, has about 100 people just on their cutscenes team.
Yes.
So you wonder how they make those incredible Overwatch Pixar quality videos. Well, you have 100 people, you can do that.
$1 million a month.
And, yeah, and $1 million a month at least. Yeah.
And this is part of the problem is also that now games aren't static, they're perpetual. We now expect patches, we expect updates, we expect new content, and we expect things like what Blizzard is doing with those videos, and these are all additional costs. But even talking about game development itself, if we're talking $15,000 a head at a studio of 200 people, it gets and you're talking 2 to 3 years of game development, I mean, you're rapidly burning through $100 million, no problem, and that's without things like actually getting space to do it in, getting all the licenses you need, doing all the localization, doing all the voice acting, doing all the mocap, all this sort of thing. And then you were talking about marketing.
Yeah, and the general rule of thumb is if you spend, you spend $100 million on a game, on the development, you're going to spend $100 million marketing it. And
Well, I know when we were talking with Microsoft about getting advertisement. My name's Cade Hendricks. I'm one of the project leads on Ark Survival Evolved. So
yay!
Some people know that.
You are a fancy man.
Yeah, no. But when we were talking to Microsoft about, okay, so what can we do about actually advertising this to people in like a proper marketing campaign, there were numbers like $40 million being thrown around.
Just
And
like that.
Just like, to put this in perspective, when we were talking with them about it, that was probably about all of the money we had made at all at that time. And they were like, nah, just 40 million, whatever, it's cool. It's a huge amount of money. It's really crazy.
So
Pro tip: start a computer game marketing company.
I will confess, I did have an interaction in Microsoft, which, again, God, there's going to be so much I can't really talk about. But this one I'm going to talk about a little bit because it was hilarious. I was in a conference room, and there were two games that they were talking about greenlighting. And one of them cost about $1 million to greenlight, and everybody agreed it would probably make like $3 to $5 million. The other game would cost about $50 to $60 million to greenlight. Everyone agreed it would almost certainly lose $30 to $40 million. And the one that got greenlit, everyone was like, yeah, no, the other one's too small. We can't actually greenlight that. We need to only do bigger projects, so we're going to greenlight the one that's going to lose $30 million. So I'm glad they're throwing out marketing for you guys instead.
Yeah. You ever worked with venture capitalists? It's pretty much the same thing. I don't do
not
small
only if you
deals.
build a franchise, but also once your company gets to a certain size, you just can't have you can't have 1,000 different tiny titles.
Well, it's interesting. So, okay, hi, I'm Joe Newman. I am a senior legal counsel at Ubisoft. Before then,
Oh, a lawyer. Oh, no.
Yeah.
I can't talk anymore.
We need one of those here.
before that,
Mine's like a steel trap. You'll remember it all.
I worked for 3 years at EA, so
Oh, okay. You've been there.
yeah. Speaking in my own personal capacity, not going to talk about anything.
None of this is official
Correct.
legal advice.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Current or former.
Don't forward this email to anybody.
But one of the things that EA was doing, you mentioned this earlier about, it's got to cover not only the cost of, it has to recoup
The
its
sunk
cost
project plus
Yeah,
it's got
and
to
then all
support
the
their
other
business.
indies.
Yeah.
Well, you see EA and a lot of other companies who are now experimenting with this, releasing indies or like having a sub-indie label.
Well, like Ubisoft did Grow
Yeah,
Home
Grow
and
Home.
some other neat little projects.
EA had like Unravel and A Way Out,
Yeah.
and these sort of artsy projects that, again, aren't expected to make a profit and can be extremely expensive. Like Unravel was like really amazing graphics for, a very simple platform.
Yeah.
Again, this puts even more pressure on the AAA game to succeed because it also has to cover the costs of the indie development.
So now that we have a lawyer up here, I'll say my name is James Portnow.
I am too. I'm James Ford.
Is there anything I can do about this?
Really quickly, I'll introduce myself. I'm Mike Sellers. I've spent more than 20 years in the industry. I'm now a professor at Indiana University running the games program, the game design program there. But I've worked in MMOs and free-to-play and AAA, started and run 3 companies, have taken venture capital money, will never do so again.
Oh my God.
Yeah, that's a whole nother snake pit.
Oh, we should do a panel
on
this.
venture capital.
I also have stories.
But I've done. Has anyone here played Realm or know of Realm of the Mad God?
Yes.
Okay.
Oh, I have a story for you.
So
sir.
does
We need to
anyone?
talk sometime.
Those few hands that went up. Was anyone playing it a few years ago during the zombie apocalypse?
Oh yeah.
Okay, that was me.
Personally, this man is responsible for the zombie apocalypse.
It went really well. But the short version of this is that we had a game that was not making any money. I was handed the game. I did not design the game. I was given the game, and they said, you have 3 months, make it profitable or kill it.
This happens a lot, by the
This
way.
happens a lot, yeah. And we made enough money after 3 months that I was given another couple months reprieve. And we eventually went from totally free to play, went from not making money, losing tons of money, to making a lot of money. And the zombies were key to it. If we have time, we'll get back to that. But so I've seen it from the $60 side as well as the free to play side. And I know there's a lot of hate for free to play as well as DLC and everything else. But hopefully we'll get to that.
Oh, I think we can also jump into that unless you actually want to introduce yourself.
Oh, sure. Luke Peterschmidt. I come at this from the tabletop side, where we've created a fair amount of revenue models that are interesting in micropayment ourselves. I designed Bakugan, if anyone played that thing or stepped on one back in the day.
I'm so pleased there were as many cheers for Bakugan.
Yeah.
as there were.
Yeah. That's awesome. So what's fascinating to me is in the tabletop space, there is a promise made by the game designer that you have everything you need to be competitive. And that's true in most games. In tennis, you can hand me a tennis racket. I can play Serena Williams. She has a tennis racket. I'm going to lose every game, but I have what I need to play to reasonably compete. And the challenge I find with the digital folks is that line of, if I go too far in any direction, I break the network of players, the people who are experiencing the same thing.
What do you
so they can
feel
talk
about
it.
for like Magic? or for any other booster pack style game?
Oh, yeah, it's fascinating. So I did a lot of collectible game design. Collectible games can't quite be as brutal as digital games because we have real cost of goods. So we have to physically make a thing. And that physical thing we make, you can sell. You can sell to a friend, you can keep or whatever. So baseball cards, you can always sell a baseball card. You can always sell a Magic card to somebody. But I do find that people who try to defend collectible card games as not sort of the lottery ticket feeling of a loot crate are kind of kidding themselves. It absolutely is. We used to call it internally the lottery ticket feeling at Wizards of the Coast. We can never say that externally, but now I don't work there. And I never signed anything.
Well, and I mean, it's where we got the idea for most of this. I mean, the
Yeah.
metaphor has only recently become Loot Crate. It's been opening packs for a long time, even
Yeah.
digital.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
To give just sort of a counter, a little bit of a counter to this. First of all, I'm designing a board game right now. I love the board game side of this. Whole nother conversation.
Yeah.
We interviewed some of the people when I was working on some of the free-to-play games. I was at Kabam at the time. We interviewed some of our players, the whales, although I still don't like that term. I understand it comes from Vegas, the gambling industry, but we had people who were spending well over $10,000 on our games and really enjoying themselves. There's some things I can't talk about. We wanted to find out who were they. And I wanted to make sure they weren't college students spending their tuition, for example, which turned out not to be the case. They really weren't. We had a lot of lawyers. But one guy actually said, and this goes to your Serena Williams example, this guy actually said, if I go out and spend $10,000 on golf clubs, I'll play better, and no one will bat an eye. But if I spend $10,000 in your game, suddenly my life is out of control. And I think about that. And I mean, especially at the time I was in San Francisco, and you see people riding down the streets on $5,000 bicycles. Are they getting to work that much faster? No, but it's a $5,000. Anyway, it's what they want to do. So there's, I have a lot of ambivalence still about free to play, much less $60 loot boxes. Trying to get back to the actual topic here, but I mean, it's a different thing when you pay. I think it's a different thing when you pay $60 for a game, and then it says, oh, but you don't actually have everything you need to be competent in this game.
Yeah.
You need to shell out some more money. That's when things get a little bit dicey.
So I think that it's this interesting question of is it a scale, right? Because free-to-play games, functionally what you're doing is the whales are underwriting everybody else getting these games free. We have lots of complaint about free-to-play games, but it still is fundamentally a free game, right? It's a thing that you got to play and enjoy for some amount of time for no dollars, which we would otherwise have to charge you some dollars for, and frankly, most of us would have never picked up in the first place because it was $10. I feel like in some ways the $60 problem is an extension of this, where you can see it as, well, this game should be $75, but I'm getting it for $60 because we've got some loot boxes in here. Or we can look at it the other way, that there is a fundamental difference between I paid an upfront cost, there is a covenant with the player that I shouldn't have to pay more. And so what do you guys feel? Is there a fundamental difference, or is it just a further extension of not quite free to play?
Yeah, so I think when you break a network, when you have two people in the same game environment playing two fundamentally different products, I think that is not a problem as long as those two people never meet each other. Right? I mean, seriously, in the collectible card game world, we had Mr. Cardbox, the guy who owned every card. And collectible card game designers work very hard to make sure that guy doesn't win or that woman doesn't win all the time just because they have more money. Mm-hmm. There has to be an element of skill that overrides all of the purchases. So your golf example is great. You can give me $5,000 golf clubs and I'm still going to suck, right? Yeah. I'm just not going to be very good. My skill, I didn't have to progress my skill. If my money takes over the job of skill.
And there's an interesting and I think kind of ironic issue here with games, both free to play and especially on the AAA side. Because AAA games are so expensive to make, they're incredibly risky. Because they're risky, we suck all the innovation out of them, so that the games become very linear, you know what someone's going to be doing in the game at any given time. What this means is there's not a lot of room for skill improvement. I mean, you can get a little bit better in a shooter making a headshot or something like that, but the window for skill is very, very small. The number of different strategies that'll work is very, very small. And what this means is that you don't have the golf issue. So now if I have the base game plus some DLC that I paid an extra $20 for, I am going to be better than you in this game. And the game developers absolutely want me, who's paid $80 or $100 or $1,000, to come up against all of you who haven't done so, because it makes my game experience better.
Well, because fundamentally, everyone else is content for you.
Exactly. Everyone else is content for me, and that's very much how it's discussed.
So I think that's part of the reason that a lot of developers go the cosmetic-only loot box approach. So they say, look, we're going to do loot boxes, but we're going to, they're not going to affect gameplay. They're not going to affect, competition. And I'm actually just curious to poll the audience, so how many people are okay with loot boxes in general, like ones that affect gameplay and cosmetic? So, okay, so what if it's only cosmetic? Oh, wow. Yeah. So there is, it's a very small, if you're looking from a legal perspective, it's like, why does that make all the difference? But it does. And I think that it has something more to do with people's perception of what it is that they are signing up for when they play a $60 game that is billed as competitive.
Well, it's a perception of fairness.
Exactly.
Unfairness, yeah.
Well,
Yeah,
so
and we
I'm
live in a
curious-
society. Sorry, we live in a society where money gets to buy you things, right? We're all okay with that. I mean, essentially, a $500,000 car is functionally not much different than a $25,000 car for how you can drive it normally. We're okay with the rich person having a $500,000 car, so we have to be okay with the rich person walking around with $500,000 of bling on their character. Like, we just have to, as long as it's not functional.
So yeah,
Sorry, if I can just say, from my experience and from looking at this, that the flip side of this is that there is one game that everyone always cites when they talk about games make good money selling cosmetic items.
There are now two. It's League of Legends.
Okay, but League has a lot of different things. It was TF2 for the longest time.
yes, hats.
Hats. We'll sell hats. I'm telling you, if you, Team Fortress 2. If you go into a presentation and say, "And we'll sell hats," they will drop the trap door will open up from under you, and that's that, because it doesn't work. I mean, occasionally, I think it worked for League because they had a lot of the things they built up, and they already had a huge base.
So
And
there's
they can get such a small percentage because they are literally the biggest. It works for the biggest game in the world.
Right.
Right.
Yes. But if you're trying to make a game today and say, okay, well, we'll either sell for $60 and cosmetics, or we'll do free to play and cosmetics, it's not going to work.
Well, so here's the interesting thing that I kind of want to get to from that. I agree with you on the difference in perception on the free-to-play cosmetic items, but I also feel like it's kind of like an arms race, right? As soon as somebody goes, okay, we're going to do not just cosmetic items because they work better, we're going to get a lot more people. So I wanted to also talk about, we've had lots of other methods of trying to extract additional dollars. We have a DLC, we've had, as people said, season passes, all this sort of thing. Why did those fail?
Yeah, why subscriptions fail?
Right, subscriptions are a good question.
Yeah.
Like, especially because nowadays you hear people all the time saying, I would rather pay a subscription than have loot boxes in this game. I don't think that's actually a true statement from most of those consumers, but why did all these other methods fail, whereas loot boxes do seem to be bringing in real money for a lot of these
I'm
games?
going to say something controversial now.
All right, you do it.
Because it's gambling.
Interesting.
It's not gambling.
It's limited. It's decreasing intermittent positive reinforcement. It's that. What it is.
So there's a
distinction.
big air gap between this and gambling. It's really, really important, but psychologically,
It's
deep in
exactly
your
the
brain,
same.
it is identical.
Yeah.
So it's
It
weird
absolutely
because
is.
all the research that I've seen says it's not. The EU did a ton of research when they were trying a couple of years ago to make their laws around microtransactions and loot boxes. And really they found that because the actual inability to redeem these things,
That's the key.
right, because you couldn't actually extract the money out, it didn't have the gambling addiction effects that gambling does. Weirdly,
No, it's true. No. What James is saying is really important, and for the vast. No,
but
the vast,
this is
no.
actually psychological research
yeah,
about
yeah.
whether or not it causes gambling addiction.
Yes.
Yeah, in terms of gambling addiction, you're exactly right.
But interestingly, they did find that a lot of the people who do spend more money than they should did it because of effectively social insecurities. They either felt like there were people counting on them, and that game designers reinforce this, right? Where your guild would be counting on you to be spending a bunch of money, and you'd feel like you were letting people down if you didn't, which I think is manipulative.
There are also, like, even the EU went so far as to say if you are going to offer things like loot boxes, you have to show the odds of getting any of the things from these loot boxes. And you're right, it was China that did that. My apologies. But there is also a very hard truth to that, where you might be talking about a line between psychological addiction, like gambling addiction, something like, I don't want to let my guild down, I want to stay up with the pack, that kind of thing. But when you open a loot box, and I think everybody here who has opened a loot box will agree, there is a serotonin cascade you get when you get the good thing, and there's a lack of that when you don't get the good thing. And that is, while maybe not as addictive as gambling, where I go in and like sunken cost fallacy, things like those show up, you are still dealing with an activity where I'm doing a thing and I'm expecting a reward and I want the reward and I'm chasing the reward and then I get the reward
the problem
and it
is
feels good.
That's games, right? Like you're talking
Yes,
about
absolutely.
who's ever gone on a raid, right? Like you're doing exactly the same thing every time you go on a
Yes,
raid.
but-
That's literally a loot system in any game, and there's this.
Yes.
I'm concerned once we say that loot systems in games are gambling, because then Final Fantasy becomes gambling, then World of Warcraft becomes
D&D
gambling.
becomes gambling.
Right,
I mean,
exactly. And so I think that it is actually something that we
The difference is that none of those examples you gave are asking you to put money in to get the experience out, except for the initial purchase. And the initial purchase that you're putting in is for the entire experience of the game, not for the random roll.
But
so
so a
can,
lo-
can I just
I just want to test that. So if you had a subscription model for World of Warcraft where you
Yes.
paid per raid attempts,
Uh-huh.
would you then have to consider that gambling? I'm just testing hypothetically.
Gambling insofar as poker is gambling.
poker is gambling.
Yes, no, I
So-
agree.
poker's a
What
game
I'm
of skill.
saying is that when you're going on a raid in World of
Absolutely
Warcraft,
not
if you
gambling.
had to pay a subscription to go on raids, and I get what you're going at with expansions give you access to raids and you're paying a subscription for WoW, and so yes. To some degree, there's a little bit of, I guess, I'm looking for a word here and it's not coming to me, so I will approach this from a different set of words. When you are going on a raid, there is a huge skill impact that determines whether or not you are successful. It's not a random number generator deciding whether or not you are successful. There is also an element of, I can get better at this. You can't get better at loot boxes over time. You can't. I'm loot boxing more, so I get better stuff out of loot boxes.
Let's
skill
put a pin
aspect.
in that and come back to
Yeah,
it.
so,
That's a
so
really good
if I
point.
can, I just want to hit something that we kind of glossed over. For those of you who may not be aware, there is a really mostly clear definition of what gambling is.
Yes.
You have to have chance,
Yes.
you have to have consideration, you have to have a prize.
Yes.
There has to be some kind of randomness involved. You have to pay someone to get in, and you, most importantly, you have to get something out
Yes.
that has real world value. So if you get a virtual loot box that you open up with a great degree of ceremony, and there's lots of wonderful perceptual things, dopamine, not serotonin, but we'll come back to that.
Sorry.
Lots of great things going on in your brain when that happens.
Yes.
You're hitting the first half of the gambling circuit.
Yeah.
There's a whole other part of this, and if you're interested, look up the difference between liking and wanting. There's really interesting neurological aspects of this, where what we get in games is I like this.
Yes, correct.
What you get in addiction, whether it's gambling or chemical addiction, is I want this even though I hate it.
Yes.
This is why addicts are not happy people.
Yep.
And but it also shows some of the clearest division between what we do in games versus what we do in gambling and other things. And just on going too long, I worked on a social casino. I say this in air quotes because I don't like the term. But I worked on a slot machine. It was an assignment. Anyway, this is in industry. And it's fascinating because all you're doing is hitting a button and getting the slot machine tumblers to go, except because it's software and because it's not gambling, because you don't get any prize out. You get gold coins, but you can't do anything with those except play the game more. We were not regulated at all, unlike the gambling industry. We can do anything we want. So there are some really wonderful highly interesting psychological effects. Like the off by one effect. If I have to get 4 pineapples in a row to get the big prize, I get pineapple, 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 and then here comes a pineapple, and it doesn't quite make, or it goes one too far. Any of us will have the feeling, I should do that again because I was almost there. Well, if you're not regulated, as the software industry isn't, and it's because it's social casino, you can say, we know at this next time they do this, they're not going to win. But we want them to keep playing, so we'll give them an off by one. We'll give them an almost hit.
That's predatory.
Yes, I completely agree. I'm not happy with the fact that I worked on this game. I completely agree that it's predatory. And I'm not happy about that. No, I'm just telling you. I'm telling you this is what happens. Now there is a big. I believe there is a big difference, a big gap between that and what we see in $60 games with loot boxes.
Mm-hmm.
I will also say that we don't see the rates anything like the rates of addictive compulsive behavior of people playing social casino that we see in real casinos.
Yes.
There is a huge difference there.
Yes. There is a question open as to whether or not that is moral or whether or not it should.
Yes.
There is a debate about it.
Yeah, and it's a valid debate.
Yes, right.
Okay, so here's a little preview of the legal panel, which you should all come to at 5:30. Sorry? 5:30.
Where is it?
May just form there. Thank you. Okay, so little legal, hopefully this will kind of give us a framework to talk about it. So there are kind of 3 key considerations when you're talking about loot boxes. The first is it gambling? I think we've been talking a lot about the legal definition of gambling, and when you talk to a lawyer, they're going to be very precise, hopefully, with legal definitions, because in a lot of jurisdictions, gambling is criminal. People could go to jail, and including the people who participated and opened the loot box. So, gambling. There are legal distinctions. Personally, I think maybe the panel agrees that under the legal definition of gambling, because there's no prize, you can't catch out, it's not criminal. Now, there's still an important legal consideration at play, which is the consumer protection angle. Things that aren't necessarily gambling, but are still posing a risk to consumers. And there are, the FTC, the Federal Trade Commission, and there are state unfair competition statutes. Things like misleading people about the odds. Things like not telling you what you actually could get. Off by one, maybe, I don't know. But if you're being unfair or deceptive in how you're marketing the loot box or how it's being delivered, there is a separate and important legal issue there. And then third of all, there's the non-legal issue. And if you do loot boxes in a way that is, for lack of a better word, pisses enough people off, they will try and pass new laws. And you see that the legislator, I can't remember his name, in Hawaii, trying to pass new laws that don't exist yet, to try and, because lawmakers can pass any kind of laws they want if enough people are behind them. So you have to look at it from all 3 angles when you're trying to determine the legality of it. I hope that's somewhat helpful.
I have a question, and this, I guess, brings us back to the question of the $60 game. I have been involved in the release of a game going from $30, $60. I've seen all the numbers. I've seen how many people stop buying it after you make it more expensive. I've seen how many people are willing to buy it when it's cheap. But the question has come up internally, and it will come up for a million other studios in a million different games. If we can't do season passes, if people aren't receptive to those, if people aren't receptive to in-game cosmetics, if people aren't receptive to in-game stuff that you can buy to actually get a power advantage, what do you do?
Right.
What are your actual avenues for recouping the increasing costs of games? And the cost of games doesn't increase just because the cost of making games doesn't increase just because tech is more difficult to keep up with and more expensive, or because you need more people on a project, but because the people purchasing the games expect more. You can't just release Mario these days, and not that Mario was easy or trivial to make, but so what do you actually do to bring in the revenue other than the flat upfront purchase, and then you're left twiddling your thumbs?
Well, especially with an ongoing content cost where people expect you to release
Exactly.
expansions and new content.
Yep.
Yeah. So anyone, thoughts?
So I don't, as someone who's recently, the tabletop industry has recently broken this $60 barrier, crushed it, right? We make $100 games, make $150 games. We know what people are willing to spend in the tabletop industry for their hobby, right? Hobbies are what define you. They're how you spend your money in your free time. So, yeah, if you could put more 3D modeling in your things. To me, I've always wondered, and I don't have an answer to this question, serialized content to me, not expansion, not a sequel, but serialized. Every time I finish a chapter of a book, I feel like I've just played a game because there's like a cliffhanger, right? Is every cliffhanger essentially a hanging micropayment? As gamers, we try to create the moment of you want a little more. Everybody in entertainment does. You eat a nice meal, they want you to leave thinking, man, I wish I had one more bite of that. A bottle of wine is that size so that 2 people will drink it and both of them want a little more wine, right? That's how we do things. Yahtzee is a off by 1 mechanic. You roll some dice, you lose, but you lose by 1, and you feel like I almost had it. Right. Dominion is an amazing game that everybody who loses feels like they almost won, right? It's a feature in everything we do, right until we put money in it, right? And then it gets tricky. But I long for the games that let me pay money to see more fixed content. But I don't play a lot of head-to-head online. I like the campaigns.
So I think a couple of people, at least most notably Valve, tried to do episodic content. And it turns out people don't really like episodic content, and it's crummy to make episodic content.
No, people don't like bad episodic content. So let me. How many of you have seen any of the Avengers movies? Okay, how many of you have seen all of the Avengers movies?
Same number of hands.
Yeah. Okay, in this crowd, right?
But so
That's DLC.
But here's the problem, and I agree. Actually, I think that the Marvel Universe model is an incredible model that we should be thinking about.
Yeah.
It's good episodic content.
But it's still a narrowing funnel, right? So I know that luckily they're doing episodic content where you don't have to experience the previous ones.
Yeah.
But if you had to experience the previous ones, we're just narrowing the funnel,
Right,
and then
right.
all of a sudden it becomes not economically efficient to continue building that episodic content.
And that's where the analogy falls apart, because if I sell you a raid in WoW, and you've never played WoW before, you're not going to have a good time, and no one around you is going to have a good time.
Yeah.
Where you can have a perfectly good time going and seeing the 15th or 16th, Marvel Universe movie, without having seen any of the other ones before it.
Yep.
Mostly. But there's no skill involved, I guess is the point.
Yeah.
Just out of curiosity, if games were $80, how many of you guys think you would buy as many games as you currently do? Right, so that's like, see, this is right here's the problem.
That's it, right there.
I want to not have loot boxes, and I think that we've been talking about there are a lot of predatory practices. There are really bad practices around how we're doing loot boxes, but at the same time, this is the wall we run into. It really is true that we would not buy as many games.
Let me give another example. That how many of you have ever been to Disney World? Okay, I love Disney World. I mean, I go there, and I've seen it all, but I love it. I pay a lot of money to go there, and some of the stuff they actually do DLC in very subtle ways. You go in there, you pay one ticket, you can do everything you want in there, but you can pay a little bit more. I don't know if fast passes are still a little bit more, but there's So they have some things, but everything in there is content that you can get, and like I can get to the front of the line.
Wait, are you actually suggesting so we throttle their ping unless they pay us more money? I love it.
No, really, kind of the opposite.
You heard it from this man first.
The opposite of that. I've always wanted to take a bunch of game designers to, I don't want to mention names, a bad amusement park, of which there are many, and a Disney park. Because when I go there, I have this feeling like, yes, I'm spending a lot of money, but I love it. I love it. So I'm totally willing to spend the money. If I go to see an Avengers movie or Marvel movie, I'm going to love that too, because I like that.
Yeah.
So I'll do it. But if it's I want to play this Star Wars game, but I can't get Darth Vader unless I he's behind a cage for me, unless I pay more money. Now it's not a feeling of I love it; it's a feeling of I hate you.
Right. Well, so this is part of
part of the stupidity to me in the Star Wars thing was, one, those loot boxes feel like opening crates of cargo.
Yeah, which is just weird.
Right,
Yeah.
it's just weird and bad. You can get stuff for characters you don't have that you want, just pointing out to you, hey, not only do you get something useless in this loot box, but blah, you don't have Chewbacca yet.
Yeah.
Hope you have $10,000 to spend on this one.
Right.
But also, I mean, I think it is exactly what you're saying, where there are more and less engaging ways to do this, and we can add value to those loot boxes outside of merely the content in them, which I think is a good point.
Can I ask a quick question out here? How many of you have more than one gaming console that you play with? Okay, and by game console I mean something that hooks up to a TV, so PlayStation and Xbox. Okay, so why did most of you pick more than one? Probably because. So let's take the cost of a console, $300, whatever. Amortize that over the unique games you got to play by buying the console, and you're up at $85. Right? That you are spending $85 a game is my point. If you count console costs in there.
So now imagine you have to buy a console and spend $85.
Yeah. Well, my point is that we all are spending more on our hobbies than we think we are. That's just how we are.
No, that's not true. Don't say that. That's a terrible thing to say.
But because they bring us such love and value.
So
I think we are willing to spend $85, and I have to go now.
I posit another question for you then. When you deal with things like, okay, so we have loot boxes, but we don't want them to be predatory.
Right.
Nobody wants any of the things, any of the ways that they spend more money on a game to be predatory or exploitative or psychologically. And that is literally the premise of every consumable good that has ever existed that's not food since the beginning of time.
Oh, well, now food is predatory.
Yes,
Maybe
it
including
is.
food.
That's true. But what I mean is, I don't know, maybe ask the crowd, what mechanism of let us give you more stuff but not an entirely new game because a whole new game costs tens to hundreds of millions of dollars to make? What can we give you in small bites that you will purchase that's not loot boxes and that won't then make you go, you're preying on us, you're abusing us?
I have no problem if it's an enjoyable game and I'm having fun with it, like Destiny. I have no problem buying DLC for it because I'm already invested in the world. I'm already invested in the characters, and
How
I
much
wanna
are
see
you-
more adventures with Cade and Ikora and Zavala and the whole crew. So I'll throw down $20 to go run around and play with Osiris for a while. I'll throw down $20 in the spring to go hang out with it to do rescue content. I have no problem with it if it's a good game that I enjoy.
How many DLC would you be okay with them making for you to purchase at $20?
That is a very good question because I have the season pass for D1 or for D2. And so far I have no problem buying. I'm looking forward to whatever they do in year 2.
Well, if it were like
I
a
don't know.
really...
I don't know
Uh-huh.
where my breaking point would be because I've never reached it.
If I can just say that from the point of view of a lot of AAA game studios, the perception is that it's always a roll of the dice for them, that the demand is going to evaporate at any moment. We saw this on The Sims, where the very first expansion pack that came out, no one thought The Sims was going to do any good. No one thought the expansion packs were going to do any good. The first expansion pack cost $250,000 to make, which is not a lot for them. Made a ton of money. They said, let's do that again. It'll never work, and it worked even better. So, but even with success stories like that, there's still this like, hang on a minute, are we just pouring money down a hole here? So, there's a lot of reticence on the side of the AAA.
I raised the question specifically because of the idea. You say I'm perfectly happy to pay $20 to go and interact with some characters, go on a raid, go explore some new content. But what if they made a new one every 2 weeks because they had the bandwidth to do that internally?
That's probably I think there's a diminishing returns.
It's all new content though.
Yeah, but there's a diminishing.
only so much content per paycheck.
Exactly. Exactly.
There
You there in the gray. Yeah, you.
Alright, I was wondering, what about like minors in terms of like using their parents' credit card money, like how that might be affected in terms of like psychological upbringing of like developing minds and stuff. I thought that would be a good thing to throw in there also because kids don't know really what they're getting into.
anything where you're dealing with people under 13 or 13 and under is a whole different world.
Yeah.
The U.S., the EU, and China all have really strict laws about that. So in general, I mean, there have been a few exceptions, but in general, people don't like to make games with DLC or ongoing purchasable content for kids under 13 or under. And when they do it, it's almost inevitable that someone's going to spend $5,000 because their 2-year-old was playing it and have to give that money back.
Yep. And that's usually what happens is either the credit card company or the company itself that allowed the purchase, or somebody in there ends up having to give the money back, and a whole bunch of red flags go up.
Like celebrities even posting on Twitter about that stuff, like, oh yeah, my 2-year-old did that.
Someone in the back, red arm in the, yes, you.
So, something I was wondering, I don't know if there's been any games with a model like this, but in an age of digital downloads where we can actually customize every single game, they're not all on discs anymore, why don't we have games where you can purchase a base game and something that comes with it, for instance, one character slot or one customizable character, and then on top of that you pay extra for additional. It's called Warplay.
So so
Yeah, we're like Killer Instinct.
We do actually have a bunch. I mean, there's in the fighting game area, there's a bunch of those, but really, there was this whole model called freemium where you would get some of the game and then you would have to purchase the rest of the game, and it tanked. Like a lot of people lost their shirts on it because unfortunately, even when people really liked the game, they were pissed that they couldn't continue to play it for free and then wouldn't buy it.
And this is where humans are just really weird.
Yeah.
Because in a free-to-play game, 98% of the people are paying nothing, and the other 2%, less than half a percent, are really carrying the game in terms of the economics of it. Or you got that on one end. On the other end, you've got $60 maybe plus some DLC, and that does okay too. In the middle, the freemium just tanks because it's like neither one, and everyone hates it.
Yeah.
And so just it'd be lovely if we could make humans want to do that, but so far we haven't been able to.
The price of the game gave you enough to play it, fully enjoy it, but there's extra stuff out there. So not quite the level of the DLC, but it's extra content. So I can buy ship A in a game, you can buy the game with ship B, we can both play the game together.
So it does work on occasion. There's this other weird thing where with DLC especially, if it's not, I've seen the graphs. If your DLC wasn't out in the first month, the amount of people who purchase it, for the most part, there are different
no,
test
you're right,
stories.
you're right.
But for the most part, that everyone's moved on. And even for games like that, if I give you enough to enjoy the game and really play it through, you'll play it through, and then some other shiny thing will show up because we have so many games coming out that very often you'll be like, oh, I kind of want to purchase this thing, but I'm going to finish this game. And then I did it, and I never end up purchasing the thing because I've got something else new to play. So it's tough. There are some times that it can be successful, but it hasn't proven as successful.
But you seem to be calling on people.
Yeah, no, I will continue to call on people.
Other guy with the red
Oh
arm.
yeah, the other guy with the red shirt.
Red and black. There you go.
Apparently, red shirt is definitely.
Yeah.
Like the way it phrased it might pick some people off, but pull a Pokemon, grab assets from existing game and just remake an older one, make a side story, just use assets you already have to make a smaller game. Also like Blood Dragon, which from Far Cry.
That works.
Both those depend on actually having an existing known IP, intellectual property. So you have to have something that's already known, which is like saying once you have $1 billion, making another million is not that hard.
Well, and it's especially hard because it's not just, okay, you have to have an established property, but there are a lot of games that have released a game and been somewhat successful that if they then released another very similar game to it would not be successful, not just because the experience of whatever the game was something you like. How, maybe this is not a good question to ask because these people are all going to have loved the game, but how much would you be willing to go out and play another Undertale, but the characters were just slightly different? Nobody wants to play Undertale and pay again for Undertale, but all the characters look a little bit different.
Here, I'll give you a case study. This happened pretty recently with Uncharted: The Lost Legacy. So this is exactly kind of what you're saying. Pull a Pokemon, take existing assets from a successful game, Uncharted 4, make a spin-off, and release it as a standalone product at a lower price. And it didn't do that well. And it's a shame because, maybe if it had sold as a DLC expansion, it might be different, but
I have the actual numbers on Blood Dragon.
Yeah.
No, and like there are some other even higher scale. Like if you look at Call of Duty, they have 3 different groups of people who make Call of Duty games, and there's one that is a huge blockbuster every time. It's the standard Call of Duty formula, exactly what you expect from yet another Call of Duty. And then they've got Infinity Ward, and they've got this other studio.
They have Treyarch.
Treyarch.
Who put out experimental Call of Duty games like World War II and Call of Duty Infinite War, or Modern, not Infinite Warfare is the sci-fi one?
Yeah.
And those were successful, but they weren't really big, huge successful, and Call of Duty carries those.
Well, they were also only successful because they had the Call of Duty
Yes,
franchise.
correct.
Right.
Because Activision actually has sort of a graph where they know that the main tentpole ones will
Yes.
sell X, and then the fall off will only be a little bit, and then they've actually expanded. They know that they can go 2 games without losing a
Yes,
single
exactly.
audience, and then they'll have the next really good one, and everybody every 3rd year you have people going, oh my god, Call of Duty's dead.
Yep.
And then they release a sequel, and everybody's like, oh my god, Call of Duty's so good.
Yeah.
So it's the same way. That is right. They have this out to a science, but unfortunately, it only works if you've got something that people want that desperately. And Call of Duty is actually also sort of the sequential content we were talking about,
Yes.
right? The episodic content.
Yes.
We can think of all these games that come out every year as that because we need to get more dollars out of them.
But
Yeah,
most
sports games are a great example too.
Yes, absolutely.
Madden
and
495.
everybody groans
Yeah.
because sports games are awful, but it's the same game with some new characters
Well,
in it.
it like with Call of Duty. I mean, this is I can say this. So the Madden games, they plan them 3 years in advance, generally speaking. So just like Call of Duty, like there will be the big ambitious one. This year, Madden 18 had the full story mode, which took 3 years to do. In the meantime, they released 2 other Madden games. And again, it's a way of, you can kind of think of them as expansion packs or DLC, but you have incremental stuff that helps to fund and fuel the bigger, more ambitious, innovative stuff.
Well, and that's all really big studios. When you deal with smaller indie studios who are trying to, okay, I put out a game and it was relatively successful. What do I do to keep my revenue stream going while I maybe want to make more content? There was a small developer who did a like a small tower defense game. It was called like Defender's Quest or something like that.
Oh, sure, I know Defender's
Yeah,
Quest.
and the developer actually talked about why does Defender's Quest 2 not exist yet? And it's because him and his wife, I believe it was, spent the 2 years after releasing Defender's Quest, releasing it on different platforms,
Yeah.
releasing special updates to Defenders, because they were chasing the revenue tail of the initial game, because that was the only way for them to make money. They couldn't spend the time that it took to make Defender's Quest 2 or to make a DLC for it, because if they stopped releasing the base game, they were done. That's it.
Yeah, the
and
name-
that's the story of most successful
Yeah.
indie games.
Peop-
Most
peop-
indie games just fail.
People in indie games talk about the Stegosaurus tail. Because
Yes.
so Monument Valley is a good example. They were very successful. They made more than 50% of the revenue in the first month
Yeah.
after they were released. I didn't buy the game for almost a year,
Monument Valley.
Monument Valley. But then they chase what's called the Stegosaurus tail, because you have this long tail that goes down and then has bumps in it at the end. As you release on a different platform, you release maybe a little bit of DLC, or you do something to it. But then Monument Valley 2, I was trying to think of another name, didn't do quite as well as the first one.
Right.
And again, it's just like a step function down. And that was like $10, I think.
Yeah.
So forget the $60.
And I mean, and it's a quality game.
It's a quality
Monument
game,
Valley
yeah.
2 is good.
It's a good
Yeah.
Um,
We got a forest of hands.
So we have probably enough time for 2 more questions, unless if there's any MAGFest folks, we can sit here for a little bit.
Can I get this individual up front? Yes, you.
Thank you. So, the first part is kind of a comment in that the argument towards Overwatch's loot boxes in particular that I see seldom brought up is that Overwatch features an in-game currency that cannot be obtained except through loot boxes. And I find it weird that nobody ever brings that up.
Hearthstone.
I'm sorry?
Hearthstone's. You mean just for the dust?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, they're coming up with a second currency too that you
No, you get the secondary.
Don't you purchase them?
It was like,
The elite skins?
yeah, the lead skins or something. They're saying it's a secondary,
Yeah, there have been a lot of experiments actually with different kinds of we call these soft currencies, and it's all very alchemical, really. I mean, what you're trying to do is drive player behavior. So if you make it so you can only get it by playing the game, you're trying to get people to play the game. If you're trying to get people just to open a loot box, I have several unopened Overwatch loot boxes. It's my shame. But if you're trying to get people to open them, then you put currency in that they can use to buy other things.
Yes, exactly.
But it's even, especially with a game like Overwatch, it's very low level.
Well, there was like way back in the day when I was first just messing around with administrating games. One of the things that we did with purchasables, you'd pay money into a cash shop, like,
Yeah.
and then you would purchase things, and some of those rewards would be social rewards.
Oh,
Where
yeah.
you get a thing, and since this was an RPG, you bring it into town, and everybody would participate in destroying it, and the things they would get out of it would be bits of that currency. So now everybody who has the bits of the currency are now going, oh, I've got a little bit of it. If I just get a little bit more, then I can buy a thing.
It's very effective.
Exactly.
Except for what worries me here is that was one of the things that the EU Commission did
Yes.
find was like people did feel pressure to be socially acceptable or to become popular
Yes.
by spending money.
Exactly.
they
There's the best example of that still I think is a game called Game of War Fire Age, mobile game, free to play.
Yeah.
Again, setting aside the morals and the ethics for just a moment. If you buy, laugh, I know. If you,
I feel like that sentence should just never come up.
I know,
All right,
I know.
go for it.
If I buy a $50 package in the game, if I buy $50 for the stuff in the game, everyone else in my alliance gets a message: A, Mike bought some stuff in the game, and B, Mike bought $50, so here's a gift for you. It doesn't cost me anything, but what it sets up is something called social reciprocity, where James is now in my alliance. He's going, well, Mike bought stuff, I should buy stuff too, so people will see my name. They make about $2 million a day in revenue. Not just because of that, but that their social mechanics around purchasing are the best of breed if you accept that.
Looking for simply
Making scads of money.
Before, you had a comment, but in the purple shirt, did you have something else that you wanted to?
Actually, yeah, to directly answer the question that was posed before, that what would get us to like buy more things. A game I've been playing a lot recently is called Path of Exile, Diablo style RPG.
Sure. Yep.
Solid game. One of the things it has, I think, one of the best cash shots I've come across, because there are loot boxes, but they call them mystery boxes, and you don't get money.
They're cosmetics and like little fireworks and cool stuff that you get.
Exactly. The cosmetics, they have outfit skins that are there for your account rather than the character, like a lot of free-to-play MMOs. So you buy like a set, you can mix and match for every character, present and future, that you make. They are effects that affect how your abilities look. Like, say you have a character that's
It's cosmetics to the nth degree.
Well,
things like that, and it's all direct purchase, so you don't need to do the whole loot box check.
You can loot box if you want, or you can just buy it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Well, for the mystery box, you have to wait a bit.
Yeah.
You have to wait a bit because it takes a few months before it's actually directly purchasable.
so one thing.
Yeah, I enjoyed it quite a bit.
No, it's interesting, but I think that one thing that raises to me that we're not going to really get time to explore here, but I think the big question is, like, the problem right now is the reason that all your loot boxes are predatory pretty much is because only whales buy them, right? And so as whales are the things that are supporting these games, the games do more and more to cater to the whales, which is worse and worse for the average consumer. So I think the question that we should be solving as an industry, which we are struggling with, and just the question that we're sort of asking is, how do we get everybody in the room to spend $15 instead of getting one person in this room to spend $6,000 and then build a game for that person who just uses everybody else's content?
Yeah.
But yeah, keep asking. So we got about 10 more minutes. We were given a reprieve.
So can I point out one force against, because I think that's something that every developer wants to do. Right. But if you look at most indie games now, the price point for those has dropped precipitously.
Yeah.
Same is true in music or any other kind of creative endeavor, where it's difficult to sell a game for $1.99. Sometimes 99 cents will do, but $15? I mean, you're dreaming, you know? Because there are more than 1,000, this is mobile, but there are more than 1,000 games that come out every single day on mobile. Slightly less than that on Steam, but still.
So what I'm more talking about is, and you're correct, but instead of it being an upfront cost, how do we make spending $15 on loot boxes worthwhile and engaging? Because I'm sure you've all had the experience where you've looked at the loot boxes and been like, I would have to spend $600 to get anything I care about, so I'm not going to spend any dollars. And to me, if we want free-to-play to be sustainable, or even $6 with loot boxes to be sustainable in a way that's not as predatory, we have to figure out some way to get more people to spend a little money rather than getting the people who spend the most money to spend even more.
You up front?
So I think there's an actual really, really interesting point that you just sort of glazed over at the very beginning. You were talking about, people buying things and places that, and this gentleman, I don't recall his name, he said that, he said that, it's fine for people to spend money to have game advantages or whatever, so long as they only meet people who will also spend those things. So you buy an DLC or an expansion for, a board game, you can only play with those people who have those board games. But then you, sir, mentioned that the people for like Call of Duty who buy these things, the people who haven't bought them are their content. And his point is very valid, is that people who buy these things, it's fair that they only play against other people who buy these things, because then it's not predatory for people who haven't bought them. But on the other hand, that's the entire point, is you make the people who buy them feel good by having them prey upon people who haven't bought them. And is there any way that you can make those two match?
Well, and just to add to that, we don't actually want to, in video games, segment our community, because if your whale that can't connect, like, how can I matchmake if there's 10 people in the world and 9 of them are asleep, right? I can no longer matchmake because I've spent $700.
And then you get into that issue of, well, you have that Activision patents.
Yes.
Well, and some of this comes down to something as simple as time versus money. If I want to be good at a game, but I don't want to spend 100 hours playing the game, I'll spend $100 playing the game. And people who have the $100 and not the 100 hours tend to be fine with that. People who have the 100 hours and not the $100 tend to think it's grossly unfair.
Yes. And I've been on both sides of
Yeah,
that,
exactly,
and I
yeah.
agree with both sides.
When I'm one, exactly. It's like
Yes, exactly. You there, on the left.
On an extension of this point, and I have no idea what the numbers are of this, but Dead by Daylight, I think, has a decent system that is workable and might be extendable, in that you buy the base game and you get the certain set of survivors and a certain set of killers, and then you can pay some additional to get new ones. And
it's like Evolve, though. That failed.
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly the point. So Dead by Daylight is an asymmetrical gameplay where you've got a person who plays as a killer, and then you've got 4 people who are survivors, and they're trying to avoid being murdered by the guy by performing some tasks around the map that they're in while he's chasing them around and trying to kill them. And essentially what they do is they allow you to purchase new killers, or I don't know, do they have new players that you can...
You buy them in the
Okay, yeah.
you buy a player and a killer at the same time.
So what you end up with there is not only do you have a case where, yes, that's kind of a hit or miss thing, where you're just buying a new character, you're buying a small piece of content, and that's kind of the freemium problem. But Dead by Daylight has a very, very fortunate game type where that can exist very well, because everything can be very, very tightly tuned. And I remember playing Dead by Daylight when it first came out, actually, and feeling like, oh man, some of these new killers are completely and utterly broken. Like the ghost one who can fade in and out and like appear on you out of nowhere. But they can tune those relatively easily. Like, it's not a huge amount of work to tune them, so that when you purchase a new one, you feel like the asymmetric gameplay is just being supported, rather than the person who bought a new thing has an explicit advantage.
But I hate to tell you,
Yes.
but all of these games actually... So if you've ever played like League of Legends and wonder why every new character is broken when it comes out, it's not because the designers have failed.
Correct.
It's actually because they have succeeded.
Yes.
They want you to buy the new character. Everyone knows those characters will only be broken for about a month, and then they'll be patched to being fixed.
That is correct.
And so we don't actually do it that way, right?
Yeah, correct.
Oh, yeah.
So it's I'm gonna add a little bit more nuance to that. That they don't. Yeah. It's not that they think that it's broken. They think that it will upset the meta.
Yes, correct.
That it will be broken in the current
dynamic.
Yeah,
Well, it's adding drama.
Yeah, they're not. I just want to. Yeah, so it's not like they're saying we're going to put something that's deliberately.
It's not like Lee
broken.
Sin when they advertised him as the ability to fly across the map and kill everything in one hit, and like completely and utterly devastatingly broken. It's just enough broken, just enough out of spec that it upsets the rest of the game.
the other-
But it isn't only upsetting the meta because almost all of them do get a nerf, like an actual numerical reduction.
But the other aspect though is that
But you're right. Like,
as a game designer, you can only get so close. You think this is pretty well balanced.
Yes,
It's going to be off. We know it's going to be off, but we need to have 1 million people play it, and then we'll say, okay, now we know how to nerf it.
so interestingly, in their case, their beta server has tens of millions of people before these ever go live, and they still come out broken.
But then everybody goes, they're awful, terrible designers when they release broken champions.
And then everyone rushes to buy it.
Yes.
Exactly. Yes.
All right, so we probably have time actually now for 2 more.
Okay, does anybody else want to pick, or do I just keep picking?
This is just all you.
Okay,
That
I'm
way
gonna
everyone
keep
can
picking.
blame you and they don't get called out.
Way in the back. Yes, you.
This-
Yes. Stand up and please shout.
Oh, yeah.
Gotchas.
So what you're describing. Sorry, I'm going to try and repeat the question. So you're talking about a system of loot box where you open it up and you get one of something. You need to complete a set. Yeah, and so you need to get right. So it's kind of like the McDonald's Monopoly thing, where like, you get 2 out of the 3 are super easy to get, and the third one's. So in Japan, that's called Kampu Gacha, and it's explicitly outlawed.
Yes.
Well, certain forms are.
Yeah, but the kind that she's describing.
Yeah. Also, this is you can look at brain scans of people getting the final element of something, and we all light up. It's something. It's what our brains do. It's if I say the first 25 letters of the alphabet, you are not going to be able to not say the last letter of the alphabet. And if I say, okay, but Z is really rare, then I've got you.
So it kills me because we got time for one more, but we actually needed 2 panels. We needed one about why the $6 price point forces the industry into this, so we could then have a conversation about how we do it better.
Yeah.
Because I think we can't have the conversation in the environment where, okay, these are just bad, give us more free stuff.
I shouldn't have said anything about this. This is on me.
This is all you. This is entirely your fault. What have you done? But so, what you're going to do is call on one last person.
You, right there, yes.
Keep it short.
All right, and then we get going.
Very quick.
One thing I noticed, which was actually counterintuitive to this, was when TF2 had launched that stupid little ring for $100 that you could barely notice on your character. It was blowing up. Every day you'd see more than like hundreds of people notifications because it would go around the world. It was something like that. So what we're doing for our text-based game and all that stuff, it's we thought counterintuitive ourselves. So like, why not a loot crate that gives you punishments?
The content there is the notification, not the ring.
Yes, exactly.
True, yeah, but then here's the thing. Your experience won't hit it. You actually are paying for yourself to get screwed over, but you know it. But there are people with malicious intent and masochism who walking over this stuff. Like, are you really willing to pay $1 to give yourself like half speed normal as everyone else around you in this game? Are you really willing to really do something sensitive?
Interesting.
You're paying for the ego boost of winning anyway.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Or the notoriety of, oh, you did that.
Because you're giving yourself more of a challenge, you got more bragging rights. Like, oh wow, I killed you with like half damage.
It's another kind of social benefit.
And this is why we also eventually have to talk about the like moral boundaries of the social benefit, because as much as we talk about gambling, from all the research I've seen, we're actually less at risk of gambling addiction with these things than we are with exploiting a lot of social things that are very bad for us, that are set up in modern society. But we have to go on that note.
On that note. Thank you
Thank
all.
you all for joining us.
Thank you all.